The car we're going to talk about today is something of a silver medalist. It's surrounded in many people's eyes by vehicles that are just plain better than it. I disagree with that assessment, though. I think the Alfa Romeo 155 is one of the most underappreciated sports sedans of all time. So let's talk about it. The Alfa 75 came out in 1985, which is probably why they called it the Milano here in America, and it was designed to offer an Italian alternative to the German sports sedan. It has a lot of things going for it. I think it's the best example of boxy styling on a sedan ever. It has 50-50 weight distribution thanks to its transaxle, and it has the glorious 3-liter Busso V6 up front. All of that just wasn't enough though. Only 375,000 were sold in 7 years compared to 2.3 million BMW 3 Series. However, before I make my next point, I must make clear that correlation does not always equal causation. Saying that, while BMW was selling like hotcakes, the M3 was decimating touring cars around the world, while the 75 was also present in touring car racing. So in order to boost sales, Alfa simply multiplied by 2. The 155 came out in 1992 with a huge swath of changes, most obvious of them being the new body, which had a phenomenally low 0.29 drag coefficient despite being bigger than the previous 75. This increase in size allowed for more cabin room and a bigger trunk for practicality. The technology was also more apparent, with optional electronically controlled dampers and a 4-wheel drive Q4 variant. In fact, it was the same drivetrain used in the Lancia Delta Integrale. Top Gear would actually call it essentially the Delta sedan. Personally, I don't have a problem, given that the Integrale is one of my favorite cars of all time. But back in 1992, using a front-wheel drive platform for an Alfa Romeo sedan caused outrage. How dare they get rid of rear-wheel drive? It's predictable and boring with front-wheel drive. It's too safe to be worthy of an Alfa sedan brand. Those were the original reviews of the 155, and it tanked its reputation. Even a 2-liter 0-60 time of 7 seconds flat or a glorious sounding V6 wasn't saving it, and Alfa Romeo needed to act fast. Luckily, they had just the opportunity. Touring car series around the world were replacing Group A with the much more lenient Super Touring category. The engines may have been naturally aspirated 2 liters, but they made 285 horsepower to the front or rear wheels. The rules were that they had to be 2-wheel drive, no 4-wheel drive cars were allowed. This cut out the Q4 altogether, but Alfa Romeo had a trick up their sleeves to circumvent some of the more finicky BTCC rules. The rear wing on the 155 had stilts, which you can install to raise the airfoil into cleaner air, providing more downforce. But in order to hide this from the other competitors, Alfa made it so the customers had to install the parts themselves, which were otherwise located in the trunk. And then to prevent the BTCC officials from noticing, they wrote this little detail on the last page of their certification book and submitted it on the last day of applications, hoping the regulators would just skim the thing and not pay attention. And it worked. The 155 TS passed with flying colors, with no suspicion of the fact that Alfa Romeo basically pulled a college student and did it all in one night. This was a golden opportunity that Alfa Romeo did not sleep on. They won 7 of the first 8 races of the season in 1994 and caught all of Britain off guard. Here were these Italian nobodies absolutely curb-stomping the best teams in motorsport. BMW won the 1993 title with 54 points to spare, and now they were 131 points behind Alfa Romeo by Silverstone. Something needed to be done, and the trunk kit loophole was axed. But Alpha had come so far they couldn't give up now, so they made 2,500 Silverstone Edition 155s just for the British Touring Car Championship, so they could keep competing with the higher wing. These rule changes leveled the playing field, but the Silverstone kept Alpha in the championship hunt, a championship that they and their driver Gabriele Tarquini would easily take, despite only scoring one more win throughout the season. Alfa Romeo would never win the British Touring Car Championship again, but they also didn't really care given their dominance in 1994, and their dominance in the Italian Super Turismo title, and their competition in the DTM Championship. And it was in DTM where Alfa would cement themselves in touring car history forever. DTM was slightly different than the British Touring Car Championship in that they used FIA Class 1 touring car rules, a predecessor to the silhouette rules used by pre-GT3 DTM. The touring cars just had to have the engine block and the general outline as the road car. That was it. The result in Alfa's case was the 155 V6 Ti. It had a ginormous wide-body kit and a PRV V6 engine like a DeLorean, except not like a DeLorean at all, since this racing variant made up to 483 horsepower and 11,900 RPM. That is up there in terms of rev limits with Formula 1 cars of the era. In its debut 1993 season, Alfa won 12 out of 22 races to take the driver's title for Nicolas Larini with 5 races to spare, while Alfa Romeo engaged in a very close championship fight with Mercedes. The constructors' title lead swapped between Mercedes and Alfa Romeo 7 different times throughout the season, and by the end of it, Mercedes was leading by 2 points heading into the last race. The last race that Alfa Romeo won, securing the championship by just 6 points. And from that point on, it was all-out war between Alfa Romeo and Mercedes, a battle of consistency versus speed. Alfa won more races, but the Germans were more consistent, and they were the ones scoring championships. A good example of this is 1994. The two constructors have been battling throughout the season, with Alfa Romeo leading a large portion of it until the penultimate race of the season, when the two of them were tied on points at 301 each, heading into the final race at Hockenheimring. And well, it was Mercedes that won the race and the championship that day, something that would become painfully easy in 1995. So after getting completely thrashed by Mercedes that year, Alfa struck back in 1996. Only for Opel to be the threat that year, and their Calibras were the car to beat. Opel scored 9 wins to easily take the driver's title, but Alfa scored 6 consecutive victories in the second half of the season to put them within striking range of another championship title. Unfortunately for Alfa Romeo, Mercedes won the last 2 races of the season, which meant that even though Opel absolutely choked, they still managed to take the title by 9 points. And then DTM collapsed because everybody left it. So what I've just described is 4 years of touring car madness with some of the most competitive racing in the history of touring cars across multiple different categories. One would think that all of this success would lead to an even greater road car than the Q4. And it did. The GTA Stradale, with bodywork ripped right out of the Super Turismo Championship. They also cut the weight down from the Q4 and used the Q4's drivetrain as a starting point. And then they cancelled the project due to production costs. So, the 155 Stradale didn't actually go anywhere despite looking amazing. In fact, the 1995 facelift not only cancelled the GTA Stradale, it cancelled the Q4 in its entirety, which meant that a new motorsport steering rack and a slight body kit didn't save the 155, and it was replaced in 1998 with the all-new 156, which finally fulfilled the 155's true potential with a 250 horsepower GTA version and 4 consecutive European Touring Car Championship titles. As for the 155, I sort of hinted at this in the intro, it isn't really held in a very high regard. Only 196,000 were sold in 8 years, with less than 3,000 of them being the Q4 performance model, but I think it is still significant in many ways. It marked the bridgehead between the old rear-wheel drive design of the 155 and the new front-wheel drive era of the 156. And that is another thing that people are not necessarily a fan of. Yes, the 156 had the GTA, and it had all the victories, but front-wheel drive sedans are nowhere near as cool as rear-wheel drive sedans, and the new Giulia proves that rear-wheel drive is the answer for sports saloons. But in all honesty, I don't give a damn about any of that, because the 155 is a 4-door sedan variant of the Lancia's Delta Integrale, and having a 4-door sedan touring car variant of my favorite hot hatch doesn't feel so bad.